Let's finish this discussion on Catholic higher education and integral human formation with the last sets of slides. So far, we deepened the argument that we left in part 2 by moving from what education can measure to ultimately what education must form. The sequence then turns to Veritatis Gaudium, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary thinking, the mutual correction of psychology and spirituality, the four dimensions of integral formation, and the formation of conscience. We ended the previous slide with Jacques Maritain, specialist warning that education can confuse means with ends. Grades are means, rankings are means, licensure results are means, research output is a means, accreditation is a means, but the human person is the end. Now let's push that argument further by asking, what happens when the most important outcomes of education are precisely the ones that are hardest to measure? We ask several uncomfortable questions. Can we measure whether someone has become wise? Can we quantify integrity? Can we measure the depth of compassion? Can we rank courage? Can we calculate fidelity? These questions expose a fundamental tension in contemporary education. Institutions need assessment. We need evidence that learning happens. We need quality assurance. We need indicators. There is nothing wrong with measurement itself. The danger comes when we begin to assume that what we cannot be measured does not matter. Or even worse, what can be measured must therefore be what matters most. Think about a graduate who receives excellent grades. Can the transcript tell us whether that person has become trustworthy? No. Can the licensure examination tell us whether that person will use professional power ethically? No. Can a research index tells us whether the researcher loves truth? No. Can the student evaluations tell us whether a professor has quietly changed a student's life? Perhaps only partially. This is Maritan's point. The most important educational achievements are often qualitative, interior, relational, moral, and spiritual. They appear slowly. Sometimes they become visible only years later. A student may forget the content of a course, but remember that a professor treated her with dignity at a moment of failure. A graduate may forget many theorists, but retain the intellectual habit of asking, is this true? Another may carry into public service a sense of justice learned through the institutional culture. These are educational outcomes, but they are difficult to reduce to numbers. Therefore, the slide does not reject assessment. It says something more balanced. Assessment must remain subordinate to the person being formed. That distinction is crucial. We measure because measurement can help formation. We do not form people merely so that we can improve measurements. So the Catholic University must continually ask, are our indicators serving the person or has the person become a servant of our indicators? This leads us to another church document, Veritatis Gaudium. So, we move from Maritan to Pope Francis and Veritatis Gaudium. So, the key phrase here is epochal change. Francis is not simply saying that the world is changing. The world has always changed. The argument is that contemporary society is undergoing a deeper transformation in which anthropological, environmental, social, cultural, and economic crises have become interconnected. That word, interconnected, that matters. A problem may appear technological, but it may also be ethical. A problem may appear economic, but it may also concern dignity. A problem may appear psychological, but it may also be social. A problem may appear environmental, but it may also involve justice. Therefore, education cannot respond adequately by producing experts who understand only isolated technical problems. The slide says we need people capable of seeing connections across domains and disciplines. That is exactly where Newman becomes contemporary. Newman worried about fragmentation. Francis now says that fragmentation is especially dangerous because the problems we face are themselves interconnected. Let's take artificial intelligence. One could treat AI simply as a technical question. How powerful is this model? How accurate is it? How efficient it is? But that is insufficient. AI raises questions about human agency, labor, authorship, education, privacy, inequality, truth, bias, responsibility, and even our concept of intelligence. No single discipline can adequately address all of those dimensions. The same is true of climate change, and the same is true of mental health. So, Catholic education in an epochal change must cultivate something beyond technical expertise, the capacity to perceive relationships among problems. That is not intellectual vagueness. It is intellectual maturity. A mature scholar knows a discipline deeply but also understands that the human problems rarely respect departmental boundaries. Let's look at three examples to make my point clearer. Climate change, artificial intelligence, and mental health. The slide's core claim is that contemporary human problems require integrative, interdisciplinary thinking animated by moral vision. Notice those final words, animated by moral vision. Interdisciplinarity alone is not enough. We can assemble many experts around one table and still fail to ask what is good, what is just, what serves human dignity. So the Catholic contribution is not merely to bring another discipline into the room. It is also to insist that knowledge must be ordered toward moral and human questions. Let's look at climate change. The slide says that no purely technical response is adequate without attention to justice and the common good. That is because climate change is not only about atmospheric science, it is also about who suffers first, who has fewer resources to adapt, who bears responsibility, what obligations exist toward future generations. These are moral questions. Artificial intelligence. For AI, the slide says the deepest questions are not technical, but concern what it means to be human. That sentence could anchor an entire course because AI forces us to reconsider what is intelligence, what is creativity, what is authorship, what is agency, what is responsibility, what dimensions of human knowing can be automated, and what dimensions should not be. The deepest question becomes anthropological and mental health. Mental health gives us a particularly important example for this course. The slide warns against reducing mental health either to brain chemistry or to spiritual failure. Both reductions miss the complexity of the person. This is precisely why psychology and spirituality must speak to one another. A person suffering psychologically may require clinical care, but the person may also ask questions of meaning. Relationships matter. Social conditions matter. Spiritual beliefs matter. Embodiments matters. No single lens is sufficient. So the central principle is that complex human problems require complex human understanding. And that leads us why we are always pushed for interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. We need to distinguish these two as they are often confused. The slide explicitly says they are related but should be distinguished. Interdisciplinarity occurs when different disciplines collaborate on a shared problem while retaining their particular perspectives. The slide gives suicide as an example. A psychologist may contribute one perspective, a theologian another, a physician another, a sociologist another. Each contributes something distinct but complementary. Notice, they do not collapse into one another. Psychology does not become theology. Theology does not become medicine. Sociology does not become psychology. The strength of interdisciplinarity is precisely that each discipline brings its own methods and questions. Transdisciplinarity goes further. Different disciplines enter into dialogue within a larger integrative horizon. The goal is not merely to put four answers beside one another. The goal is to let disciplines challenge and illuminate one another, potentially generating new understanding. That distinction is important. Interdisciplinarity says, what can we each contribute? Transdisciplinarity adds, what happens to my understanding when I seriously encounter what you see? For this course, the slide makes the application more explicit. Spirituality and psychology should not merely sit beside one another. They should enter genuine conversation in which each can correct, enrich, and expand the other's understanding of the human person. That is a much more demanding project because genuine dialogue means that I may need to revise my assumptions. Psychology may expose unhealthy spiritual patterns. Spirituality may expose reductionistic psychological assumptions. So the purpose of dialogue is not polite coexistence, but mutual illumination. But there are also instances where psychology corrects spirituality. If psychology and spirituality genuinely enter dialogue, then psychology must sometimes be allowed to correct spirituality. The phrase may sound provocative, but the slide is not saying psychology corrects God or faith itself. It's saying psychology can identify distortions in the way religion is psychologically lived. There are four examples there that we can consider. First, unresolved personal conflicts may be projected onto religious figures, communities, or images of God. For example, if someone has experienced authority only as punitive, God may be imagined primarily as punitive. If love has been conditional, then divine love may be imagined as conditional. Again, this does not mean God is merely psychological projection. It means that our perception of God can become entangled with personal history. Psychology helps uncover that entanglement. The second example is compulsive religiosity. The slide names scrupulosity, unhealthy dependence, and avoidance disguised as surrender. A person may appear highly religious externally while actually being driven by anxiety. Prayer can become compulsive. Moral decision making can become paralyzed by fear. Dependence on authority can be mistaken for obedience. Avoidance of responsibility can be called surrender. Psychology helps us ask what is actually happening beneath the religious behavior. The third example is especially important institutionally. The slide points to narcissistic spiritual leadership and the manipulation of religious language to maintain power. Religious language can be abused. Obedience can be used to silence. Humility can be used to prevent legitimate criticism. Sacrifice can be used to justify exploitation. Faith can be used to suppress questions. Psychology helps identify patterns of narcissism, dependency, manipulation, and coercion. Finally, psychology can correct spiritual misdiagnosis. There are two examples here. Depression may be mislabeled as spiritual dryness. Clinical anxiety may be interpreted as failure of faith. This is potentially harmful. A person suffering depression may need clinical care, not simply stronger prayer. A person with anxiety does not necessarily lack trust in God. This is why the final sentence is so important. Psychology asks spirituality to take the concrete, suffering human person seriously. That is the corrective. But this is not only one way. Spirituality can also correct psychology. Psychology does not simply critique spirituality. Christian spirituality also asks difficult questions of psychology. The slide warns that psychology can sometimes reduce flourishing to adjustment, satisfaction, autonomy, or subjective well being. These are genuine goods, but are they sufficient? Christian spirituality asks larger questions. What if love requires sacrifice? The slide asks whether psychological approaches centered only on individual well being can adequately account for forms of love that gives themselves without calculating return. Think of parenthood, caregiving, friendship, religious vocation, service to the poor, martyrdom. Sometimes love costs us. If flourishing basically means only increasing comfort and reducing distress, sacrificial love becomes difficult to explain. But Christianity says that sometimes the most meaningful human acts involve self gift. What if freedom is more than choosing what I want? This is the second challenge. Modern accounts of autonomy may define freedom primarily as absence of external constraint, but the slide proposes a richer account. Mature freedom is the capacity to choose what is genuinely worthy of the human person, even at personal cost. Freedom is therefore not simply I can choose. It is also I am becoming capable of choosing well. That links directly to conscience formation. What if fulfillment cannot be achieved by turning inward? The third challenge concerns transcendence. Psychology sometimes emphasizes self actualization, but spirituality asks whether the human person can finally satisfy the deepest desires of the self through the self alone. The slide says that spirituality reminds psychology of transcendence, that the person is oriented beyond the self and cannot be completely fulfilled through self actualization alone. Again, this is deeply Augustinian. The restless heart cannot become its own final resting place. So the dialogue becomes balanced. Psychology tells spirituality, do not deny the concrete human person. Spirituality tells psychology, do not reduce the human person to the immanent self. Together, they give us a richer version. But as we've said, integral formation, human formation, is more complicated than that. So now the whole lecture begins to synthesize. There are four interconnected dimensions: human formation, spiritual formation, intellectual formation, pastoral or service formation. The slide explicitly says, too, these dimensions must not be separated. Integral formation seeks wholeness, by integrating intellect, spirit, humanity, and service. Let us take each one. Human formation. The diagram identifies character, emotional maturity, self-knowledge, freedom. Human formation asks, can this person know himself? Can she self-regulate emotion? Can he relate maturely? Can she tolerate frustration? Can he act freely and responsibly? This is the psychological foundation. Spiritual formation. The diagram identifies relationship with God, prayer, discernment, theological virtues, conformity to Christ. Spiritual formation asks, toward whom is this person ultimately oriented? How does faith shape life? Can this person discern? Can love, faith, and hope become organizing virtues? Intellectual formation. The diagram identifies disciplined thinking, critical reasoning, intellectual humility, pursuit of truth. This is not merely acquiring facts. It actually means learning how to think intellectually. And this is about thinking carefully, how to question, how to evaluate evidence, how to acknowledge, limits, how to pursue truth rather than simply defend one's preferred conclusion. Finally, pastoral or service formation. Placing gifts at the service of others. Practical competence formation. This connects formation to vocation. Knowledge becomes service. Competence becomes mission. Personal gifts become gifts for others. So the most important point is the integration. We do not want intellectually brilliant people who are emotionally immature. We do not want spiritually devout people who cannot think critically. We do not want psychologically mature people who use their freedom only for themselves. We do not want service without competence. Integral formation asks these dimensions to support each other. A useful formula is human formation gives the person stability. Intellectual formation gives the person clarity. Spiritual formation gives the person orientation. And service formation gives the person mission. That is wholeness. But we don't end there. The sequence cul- culminates in conscience. This is a very important transition because conscience is where knowledge, freedom, judgment, moral principles, experience, and responsibility come together. Let's begin with a clarification here. Conscience is not simply feeling strongly about something. And conscience is not simply identical with personal preference. This distinction matters enormously today. Sometimes we hear, my conscience tells me, when was it really meant? What it really meant is, this is what I want. But Catholic moral theologies understands conscience more rigorously. We cite the Catechism and describe conscience as an interior judgment of reason through which a person recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act. Notice the word judgment. Conscience is an act of moral judgment, and judgment must be formed. The slide therefore gives us a very practical description of what students need to learn. Gather relevant facts, examine motivations, identify principles, consider consequences, listen to others, recognize bias, evaluate competing goods, remain accountable to truth. That is an excellent description of moral education. Consider a difficult ethical decision. Conscience does not simply ask, how do I feel? It asks, what are the facts? What am I actually intending? What values are at stake? Who may be harmed? Who may benefit? What duties exist? What biases do I bring? What does another perspective reveal? What does truth require? This is where our whole lecture converges. Newman's intellectual humility matters because conscience must listen. Psychological maturity matters because anxiety, projection, and desire can distort judgment. Spirituality matters because freedom must be ordered toward genuine good. Interdisciplinarity matters because complicated moral problems often require many forms of knowledge. And formation matters because good judgment does not suddenly appear when a person graduates. It must be practiced. So we end with a very strong statement. A university that teaches students what to think, but not how to judge responsibly, has failed at a fundamental level. That is perhaps the best place to end this sequence. The Catholic University does not exist merely to produce people who possess correct answers. It seeks to form people who can see, discern, judge, choose, and act responsibly in the presence of truth. And that takes us naturally to freedom, formation, accompaniment, and dialogue. So, from the formation of conscience, we now move to the conditions that make conscience formation possible. And the central question is no longer only what should the university teach or Catholic university teach, but how should it form persons without coercing them, abandoning them, or contradicting its own values. We have just discussed conscience, and now we need to talk about freedom. Because conscience without freedom is not really conscience. Catholic education is sometimes misunderstood as though it were primarily about imposing beliefs, rules, and expectations. But we insist on something more fundamental. Authentic formation requires freedom. One cannot force faith. One cannot force wisdom. One cannot force love. External compliance is not the same as interior appropriation. This is, I think, extremely important. A student may obey a rule because of fear. A seminarian may comply because of authority. An employee may say yes because of institutional pressure. A student may repeat the correct answer because that is what the professor expects. But compliance is not yet formation. Formation happens when the person begins to see the good, choose the good, and love the good. That's why we need to distinguish two understandings of freedom. Immature freedom says, I can do whatever I want. Freedom here means the absence of restraint. No one tells me what to do. No one limits my choices. Whatever I desire becomes legitimate because I desire it. This is a very thin account of freedom because simply having choices does not tell us whether those choices are good. A person addicted to something may technically choose it repeatedly, but is that person becoming more free? Perhaps not. Someone who's incapable of resisting anger may choose to lash out, but is that mature freedom? Again, perhaps not. But there's also mature freedom. So the question is, what is worthy of my freedom? Mature freedom is the capacity to choose genuinely good things and gradually to love them with greater depth and consistency. That is a richer vision. Freedom is not merely freedom from, it is also freedom for. Freedom for truth, freedom for love, freedom for responsibility, freedom for service, freedom for vocation. This is why Catholic formation cannot be satisfied with producing rule-following students. The slide says very clearly that the task is not to manufacture obedience to institutional expectations, but to form persons capable of recognizing, choosing, and loving the good. That is the difference between discipline and formation. Discipline may regulate behavior, formation seeks to shape freedom. Once we have arrived, or once we affirm freedom, A practical question immediately follows. If we do not control students, what is the educator supposed to do? The answer is accompany. The slide calls accompaniment a central principle connecting spirituality, psychology, and education. To accompany someone does not mean making decisions for them, living their life for them, or removing every struggle, or protecting them from every consequence. The slide defines accompaniment very precisely. It means walking with someone while that person learns to see, judge, choose, and assume responsibility. Those four verbs are worth emphasizing, and I'll stay there a little bit. See what is actually happening. Can the person perceive reality clearly? Judge what is good. What principles matter? What are the consequences? Choose. What will I actually do? Assume responsibility. Can I own the consequences of my choice? This is formation. A good teacher does not simply give answers. A good mentor helps a student develop the capacity to discern. A good spiritual director does not replace the directee's conscience. A good psychologist does not make life's decision for the client. This is where the three fields converge. Psychology respects agency. Spirituality respects conscience. Education respects intellectual freedom. All three recognize that person often need another person to walk with them while they mature. Accompaniment, therefore, requires patience because growth cannot always be rushed. Sometimes the educator knows the answer before the student does. But if the educator simply imposes the answer, the student may obey without ever developing the capacity to discern. That is why accompaniment is slower than control, but it is also more formative. There are two opposite failures that goes with accompaniment. Both disrespect the person being formed. The first is authoritarianism. The second is indifference. Authoritarianism says, I will tell you exactly who you should become. The educators will replaces the students developing conscience. Discernment becomes compliance, and this can easily happen in religious education. An institution may say, we know what is good for you, and perhaps in many cases, it does possess genuine wisdom. But the danger comes when the institution no longer distinguishes between guiding conscience and replacing conscience. If students are simply taught to obey authority without learning to judge responsibly, then formation remains immature. They may behave well while the authority is present, but what happens when the authority disappears? That becomes the test. The second opposite extreme says, become whatever you want. Your choices make no difference. This sounds respectful, but the slide says it can actually become abandonment. It reduces formation to subjective preference and abandons the institution's responsibility to propose genuine goods. Imagine a teacher saying, you decide whatever is true for you. That may sound open-minded, but education requires more than affirmation. Students deserve challenge. They deserve correction. They deserve truth. They deserve people who take their choices seriously enough to say, think again. Authentic accompaniment, therefore, stands between these extremes. The slide says it beautifully. Your freedom matters. Your choices matter. Truth matters. I will walk with you as you learn to discern responsibly. That is a powerful formula. It respects freedom, but does not worship preference. It respects the person, but does not abandon truth. The slide explains why accompaniment matters both psychologically and spiritually. Psychologically, it offers relational security, feedback, empathy, challenge, perspective, encouragement. Spiritually, it supports discernment, prayer, conversion, recognition. So accompaniment is not simply being nice. It includes challenge. It includes truth. It includes responsibility. This leads us to dialogue. If accompaniment respects freedom, then dialogue becomes essential. The slide says that a Catholic university must cultivate dialogue not merely as a teaching technique, but as an intellectual and moral commitment. This is important. Dialogue is not just let's have a discussion. Dialogue is an disposition toward truth. It assumes I may know something, you may know something, we may disagree, but truth is worth seeking together. Dialogue is not relativism. Dialogue does not mean that every position is equally true. Rather, it means that truth should never fear encounter. This is crucial. Sometimes people think that if I really believe something, I should avoid serious disagreement. But genuine conviction should not be able to enter dialogue. Why? Because dialogue can reveal weak arguments, unexamined assumptions, biases, blind spots, or even truths we have overlooked. So dialogue does not destroy conviction, but can purify it. Dialogue, too, requires psychological maturity. This second point is even more interesting. A person whose identity depends on always being correct will experience disagreement as a personal threat. This is psychologically insightful. If my self-worth depends on being right, then when you disagree with me, I do not simply hear I do not simply hear you disagree with my argument. I hear you are attacking me. And once disagreement becomes personal threat, dialogue collapses. I become defensive. I attack. I withdraw. I mock. I dominate. Psychological maturity allows a person to hold two things together: conviction and openness. The slide gives four beautiful formulations worthy of reflection: confidence without arrogance, conviction without hostility, openness without relativism, humility without intellectual passivity. These are not merely academic skills. They are moral and spiritual virtues. To listen without surrendering truth, to disagree without humiliating, to speak firmly without domination, to admit error without collapsing one's identity. That is mature dialogue. And all of these finds home precisely in a Catholic university. Now, dialogue becomes institutional. The Catholic university should become a place of encounter. The slide says different forms of knowledge should meet not in forced harmony, but in honest, respectful, truth-seeking dialogue. Notice, not forced harmony. That is important. Catholic education does not mean pretending that every tension up disappears. Sometimes faith and science raise difficult questions. Economics and ethics can conflict. Professional requirements and vocational ideals can create tension. The university's role is not to suppress those tensions, it is to make them intellectually fruitful. Let's look at three examples: faith and science. The Catholic tradition does not accept that faith and reason must exist in permanent war. Both seek truth and can illuminate one another when pursued with integrity. That does not mean theology dictates scientific conclusions, nor does it mean science answers theological questions. It means both can remain open to truth. Economics and justice. Economic analysis matters, but economics detached from justice can corrode dignity. At the same time, ethical claims that completely ignore economic realities can become practical. So encounter prevents simplification. The economist must hear the ethicist. The ethicist must understand economic realities, professionalism, and vocation. The slide also insists that professional excellence and vocational identity are not opposites. The Catholic University should cultivate both. A student should become excellent at the profession while understanding the profession as service and mission. This is very important. Catholic identity should never be an excuse for mediocrity. A Catholic hospital should not be less medically competent because it is Catholic. A Catholic university should not be less academically rigorous because it has a religious mission. The final claim is that professional excellence and Catholic identity should never be placed in opposition, but always as integration. Integration always. Okay? Uh, Now let's look at the hidden curriculum. We've already spoken about this in one slide, so something that you are already familiar with, actually. Um, and therefore something that we will consider as we move forward. Okay? Uh, so now we return to one of the most powerful ideas, the hidden curriculum. One is formal, the other is hidden. The formal curriculum is basically your syllabus, your course outcomes. This is actually your uh, readings, assessments, and all. This is it, no? Uh, and therefore something that you have to pay attention to. So just a minute. So everything we've been talking about, sorry, I just came from the break. That's why my train of thought is cut. Um, but so that is a formal curriculum. Everything that is that we see or that we officially claim to teach. But students encounter another curriculum, the hidden curriculum. This is what students learn by watching how the institutions actually behaves. Do people matter more than reputation? Is honesty rewarded? Are mistakes treated as opportunities for growth? Are vulnerable students protected? This curriculum is often more powerful because it is embodied. And there are sharp examples. So if a university teaches Catholic social teaching but exploits employees, as we said, students notice. If it teaches dignity but humiliates struggling students, students notice. If it teaches truth but tolerates dishonesty for institutional advantage, students notice. This means hypocrisy is itself educational. The contradiction teaches something. It teaches that principles are negotiable. It teaches that public image matters more than truth. It teaches that Catholic language may be ceremonial rather than real. This is why institutional coherence matters so much. The university must not ask only what do we teach, but what do our practices teach despite what we say. That is the harder question. Of course, we need to assert that Catholic identity is a culture, not just a decoration. Catholic identity cannot be reduced to crucifixes, statues, mass schedules, prayers before meetings, or theology subjects. We do not reject these things, but we say that they can be deeply meaningful, true, but symbols need corresponding culture. Otherwise, symbols become empty, or worse, ironic. A crucifix in a classroom asks, how does this institution understand power? A Eucharistic celebration asks, is this community genuinely becoming communion? These are profound questions. The crucifix is not merely decoration. It presents a particular image of power, power expressed through self gift. love, service, suffering, solidarity. So if a Catholic institution displays the crucifix but uses power through humiliation, domination, or fear, the symbol and the practice contradict each other. The Eucharist is similarly demanding. The Eucharist proclaims communion. So what does it mean to celebrate Eucharist in an institution marked by division, exploitation, elitism, or indifference? The slide's concluding point is crucial. Catholic symbols become formative when institutional life embodies what those symbols proclaim. So when symbol and practice diverge, students are often formed not by the symbol but by the contradiction. They learn Catholic identity is performance, it is branding, it is appearance, it's something we display, but perhaps not something we actually live. That may be one of the most serious dangers facing Catholic institutions. The solution is not to remove symbols, it is to make institutional life worthy of the symbols. And this gives us the central thesis. Freedom prevents formation from becoming coercion. Accompaniment prevents freedom from becoming abandonment. Dialogue prevents conviction from becoming closeness. Encounter prevents knowledge from becoming fragmentation. The hidden curriculum exposes whether our values are actually embodied, and Catholic identity becomes credible only when culture and symbol correspond. That is when the university ceases merely to appear Catholic and begins to become a genuinely Catholic formative community. Now let's look at some contemporary realities of like mental health, digital formation, attention, wisdom, and integrated human development. Mental health and Catholic formation. A Catholic university committed to integral formation must take mental health seriously, not as an optional concern, not as something delegated only to the guidance office, not as an afterthought when students are already in crisis, but something that belongs to the core educational mission of a Catholic institution. Why? Because if we say that education concerns the whole person, then psychological suffering cannot be treated as though it were outside the task of formation. That's why what must not be, there's a very important corrective. What must not be said. We cannot say depression is not necessarily a lack of faith, or anxiety is not necessarily failure to trust God. Trauma is not cured simply by telling someone to forgive. Psychological suffering should not automatically be interpreted as spiritual weakness. These statements matter because religious environments can sometimes spiritualize psychological suffering too quickly. A student says, I feel depressed, and someone says, you need to pray more. A student says, I'm anxious, and someone says, you need to trust God. Someone reveals trauma, and immediate response is, you need to forgive. These responses may contain elements of spiritual truth, but if they're used to bypass psychological reality, they can become harmful. Prayer matters. Trust matters. Forgiveness matters. But so do trauma, neurobiology, relationships, stress, memory, social pressures, and professional treatment. Catholic formation must resist the temptation to choose between psychology and spirituality. What must be affirmed? Well, psychological treatment is not opposed to prayer. Professional mental health care can participate in the healing of the person. That is a very Catholic way of thinking. Grace does not abolish nature. Faith does not require us to reject the ordinary means through which healing occurs. A psychologist may become one of the means through which healing is mediated. A physician may become part of that process. Friendship may become part of healing. Prayer may become part of healing. Community may become part of healing. The point is integral care. So, and we identify four dimensions: psychological, relational, spiritual, and social. So when someone suffers, we ask not only what symptom is present, we also ask what meaning does this person give to the experience? What spiritual resources are available? What spiritual struggles are present? What relationships are involved? What social pressures are present? This is what integral formation looks like in practice. It refuses reduction. The person is never only a diagnosis, but neither is the person only a spiritual problem. The whole person deserves attention. And therefore, somebody we have to pay attention to. Now, let's turn toward a distinctly contemporary issue: digital formation. Students today are not only formed by families, classrooms, churches, and universities. They are also formed by screens, social media, algorithms, notifications, platforms, search engines, video feeds, and increasingly by artificial intelligence. The slide states that students experience identity through digital mediation. They compare themselves continuously, curate identities, receive constant stimulation, and consume information at great speed. The word formation is important. Technology does not simply give us tools. Technology creates habits. It shapes patterns of attention. It trains desire. It changes memory. It affects relationship. It influences how we experience time. And it can even change the way we experience ourselves. Consider social media. The user begins by asking, what do I want to share? But gradually, another question emerges. How am I being seen? And then, how do I compare with others? And eventually, perhaps, who am I if nobody notices me? That is no longer merely technological, it is psychological and spiritual. The slide says students may struggle increasingly with silence, sustained attention, solitude, contemplation. Why? Because digital environments often reward the opposite: speed, novelty, reaction, interruption, constant stimulation. The deeper educational question is therefore not, do students use technology? Of course they do. The deeper question is, how does technology shape attention, desire, relationships, memory, identity, and freedom? That is the question Catholic formation must ask. Not technology good or bad. That's very very simplistic. Rather, what kind of person is the technological environment for me? That returns us to the central question from the very beginning of this lecture. If digital culture contributes or fragments attention, then formation must recover attention as a discipline. Attention is not merely a cognitive skill, but a moral and spiritual disposition. This is very important. Attention is moral because what we attend to says something about what we value. When I truly attend to another person, I communicate. And that's something to pay attention to. These ideas deserves more than so when I truly attend to another person, I communicate. You matter enough for me not to be elsewhere. When I attend carefully to a difficult text, I communicate. This idea deserves more than quick reaction. When I attend to God in prayer, I resist the tendency to reduce everything to productivity. That's why we have to identify three practices. Uh, Reading difficult texts slowly. To read a difficult text is already an act of intellectual seriousness. It means refusing to reduce complex ideas to slogans or headlines. This is increasingly countercultural. We live in a world of summaries, short videos, headlines, key takeaways. But some truths cannot be grasped instantly. Augustine cannot always be summarized in 30 seconds. Newman cannot be reduced to a quote card. A serious philosophical argument requires patience. Slow reading, therefore, trains humility. The text does not immediately conform itself to me. I must learn to stay with it. Listening carefully. Listening is the first form of respect. That's worth emphasizing. When I listen to you, I temporarily suspend my need to dominate the conversation. I allow your perspective to arrive. And this connects to dialogue, connects to accompaniment, connects to psychological maturity. A person who cannot listen cannot accompany. A person who cannot listen cannot dialogue. And perhaps a person who cannot listen to another person will also struggle to listen in prayer. The third practice is silence. The slide says to attend to God is prayer. To remain with unresolved questions is intellectually and spiritually formative. This is also crucial. Not every question must be answered immediately. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every discomfort needs instant resolution. Maturity includes the ability to remain present to complexity. That is intellectual patience, psychological tolerance, and spiritual contemplation. So, in a digital age, silence becomes almost an act of resistance. Attention becomes countercultural, and contemplation becomes educational. And we're back to something you will hear very often, the distinction between information and wisdom. Data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. Here's a hierarchy. At the bottom, data refers to raw facts, observations. Then information is organized and contextualized data. And at the highest level, knowledge and wisdom, understanding relationships and allowing truth to guide life. So universities are very good at data. We collect data, we organize information, we produce knowledge. But Catholic higher education asks, can knowledge become wisdom? Wisdom asks questions that data alone cannot answer. What is worth knowing? What should knowledge be used for? Who benefits? Who may be harmed? What is just? What contributes to human flourishing? What does love require? These are wisdom questions. Notice that wisdom is not simply having more information, because a person can know an enormous amount and still lack wisdom. A powerful AI system can process enormous amounts of data, but the Catholic University asks something different of the human person. How should knowledge become good judgment? This is where conscience enters. This is where virtue enters. This is where love enters. That's why wisdom integrates intelligence and character. That is exactly what we have been arguing from the beginning. Knowledge without character is incomplete. Competence without vocation is incomplete. Information without wisdom is incomplete. So perhaps the Catholic educational task is really one, the university teaches us to know, and two, formation teaches us what knowledge is for. This is a model of integral formation, but I'd like to skip it. Maybe you can pause the recording at a certain point and reflect on it. And there are also 10 principles for a Catholic psychology of education uh, that we can reflect on. I'll just read it very slowly, and then I hope you can reflect on it. The person is more than performance. Human development is relational. Emotional and psychological maturity support learning. Freedom requires formation. Knowledge influences identity. And then this is the 6th to 10th. Desire must be educated. Faith and reason are mutually illuminating. Professional competence should become service. Education should foster vocation. The ultimate goal is human flourishing. And then there's a case study of a doctorate student giving you opportunity to read the case through multiple cases, through Augustine and Catholic formation, and some few questions for you to think about as doctoral students also, and more. Uh, so I'll go immediately to this slide and just, uh, push the reflection a little bit further for you to be able to see where we are here now, right? So um, it's very important, especially now that we have reached week 4. And hold on, please. I know I'm more than 1 hour already, but um, week 4 has moved from the individual person to the formative community, from the interior world of identity, desire, faith, and psychological development to the institutional environment in which those things are shaped. That movement is important because sometimes formation is treated only as the individual's responsibility. We say develop yourself or become mature or grow spiritually, manage your stress, discern your vocation. But week 4 has shown us environments matter, institutions matter, relationships matter, policies matter, cultures matter. A good person can be supported by a good environment. A struggling person can be helped by a formative community. But institutions can also intensify perfectionism, competition, alienation, anxiety, fragmentation. So, integral formation must ask the question, what is happening inside the person? And what kind of environment is shaping that person? This is where psychology and Catholic higher education meet. The student forms the university, but the university also forms the student. So, if you, the next slide will be the voices that have guided us. But maybe one question is, what kind of human beings are we helping become? This is a question a Catholic university must ask repeatedly, honestly, and institutionally of every dimension of its life. Notice the words repeatedly, because formation is never finished. Institutions drift, values can become slogans, mission statements can become routine. So the question must be asked again and again. Honesty, honestly, not what do we claim to form, but what are we actually forming? Look at the graduates. Look at the faculty. Look at the students. Look at our leadership. Look at our policies. What kind of persons are emerging? Institutionally, this is not simply a question for individual faculty. It belongs to curriculum, research, administration, student services, finance, campus ministry, guidance, leadership, assessment, faculty development. Every dimension participates in formation. Formation is not adding spirituality to psychology. It's not adding prayer to academics. It's not adding theology courses to professional education. That would be fragmented. Formation is integration. Integration of the intellectual, moral, psychological, spiritual, relational, vocational. This is what the word integral means. Not that every student becomes perfect, not that every dimension develops at the same speed, not that tension disappears, but that the person is not reduced to one dimension. The student is more than a mind, more than a future employee, more than a grade, more than an diagnosis, more than a religious practitioner, more than a resume. The student is a person. And the Catholic University holds that before that person, a vision of human wholeness that no single discipline can supply and no measurable outcome can completely capture. So perhaps the deepest question for educators is not, did I finish the syllabus? Not even, did my students learn the material? Those questions matter. But beneath them is something larger. What did my teaching help them become? For administrators, what does our institution help people become? For psychologists, what image of human flourishing guide our practice? For theologians, does our theology become life-giving wisdom? For students, who am I becoming through what I am learning, desiring, choosing, and loving? And for the Catholic University, are we forming people merely to succeed or helping them become persons capable of truth, freedom, love, vocation, service, wisdom, and the communion with God? That is the question that gathers everything. Looking ahead, we will now look at the church's model of integral formation, and we will look at that in terms of universities, uh, seminaries, and counseling or healthcare. And these are the required readings, supplementary readings for you to consider. I'd like to end with the last slide, okay? Uh, which is basically closing everything already, because we have already spent a lot of time working on these ideas. And you see, no, the succeeding discussions on week 5 is nothing but the summary or the conclusion already. uh, I think my video, in a way, my video, I hope it will not die, because normally if it happens like this, namamatay yung, pero sana hindi mamatay. But anyway, let's look at this one that you have in front of you. Okay? So, as we were saying, and we're now actually in the end,